How you doing? Doing good? Doing good? Mr. John Dickson, I have one question. Did they behave while I was away?
Yeah, they did. They were awesome, and made me feel like I was awesome. And one of the great things is not just being at this campus, which is lovely, but bumping into people all over Grand Rapids midweek.
You are the most recognizable Australian in this city right now.
That's fantastic. I count now 8 different sets of people that I've met just this week who have said, oh, I'm at Knapp Street, I'm at Kentwood, I'm at East Paris, or whatever. In fact, including last night, we bumped into a couple of people at the restaurant and said,
we plant them.
Well,
just to bolster John's fragile self-esteem.
Beginning to wonder that.
Well, in case you've been out of the loop, or if this is your first time with us, John Dickson today completes a series, and it's called What's the Difference? 3-part series. And we are just so grateful that he's been willing to give himself to us. John hails from Sydney, Australia. He's a scholar, he's a teacher, and he's an author. And John, just thank you for pouring into us. Thank you for bringing your full self to this congregation. I know you enjoy John. You just can't believe how much he enjoys you.
Thanks. On Friday, I bumped into another couple of people, right, just randomly down in downtown Grand Rapids, in the ice cream shop. I'm just lining up to order my ice cream, right? And it turns out it was Joel, the guitarist this morning, and one of his mates who watches online, lives miles away, but watches online, and they were like, oh, John, g'day. You know. Well, actually, they didn't say g'day. They said some other thing. And they wouldn't let me pay for my ice cream. They insisted on covering it, which was just so sweet of them. So, of course, I ordered 3 giant scoops of ice cream in a waffle bowl and went on my merry way. Speaking of beautiful food, I was sailing around Pittwater at a gorgeous Christmas party some years ago in Sydney, and we were on this giant yacht eating beautiful cheese and bickies and pate and gorgeous drinks, and the sun was going down. It was just spectacular. And I met a friend of my wife that evening who started to tell me how beautifully things were going for her and her family. Her husband had received a promotion recently, so she was saying how financially secure they felt. They'd just bought a property on the northern beaches of Sydney, which is spectacular. So they were feeling domestically secure. And the kids were about to start at school, so she felt like she had some me time, and she was just sort of going off on how beautifully things were going. And then without any prompting from me, she just sort of looked off into the horizon and said, but John, you know, sometimes I really wonder if there's some extra thing to life, some spiritual dimension I've never really looked into. Now, I don't know if she saw my eyes lighting up at the turn in conversation. But as quickly as she'd begun this little soliloquy, she stopped and she looked at me, she said, oh, but I'm not that interested in it. I don't really want to talk about it. Want some more food? And I was not quick-witted enough to sort of point out the kind of clash between these things. I just said, yes. But I came away thinking, this is classic Western spirituality. A recognition of the spiritual impulse that is universal, but also a pretty keen habit at avoiding the implications of that impulse. And that's what I want to talk about today. Having looked at specific religions over these last couple of weeks, I want to pivot to look at the universality of the religious impulse and the ways we often find to avoid the universality of the religious impulse. And then I want to pivot to why I think Christianity has a claim on every one of us, whether religious or irreligious, or just plain distracted. So that's my plan. The first thing I want to say is, of course, that religion and the religious impulse is universal. Everywhere we look, we see religion. As far back as we go to the oldest rock art that we can find in the world, which is in the Kimberley district in Western Australia, we find images almost always in the ancient indigenous rock art that depict a spiritual realm right alongside a physical realm. So as far back as we go in cultural analysis, there's religion. There's that spiritual impulse. But then let's just wind forward to the very latest research into American beliefs. And I think I pointed this out last time I was here. The Pew Research Center did a massive study of America and found that still 80% of Americans, when asked, do you believe in God, say, yep. And then that leaves about 19% who say, no, I don't believe in God. But then they followed up with the question, well, what kind of God do you not believe in? And half of the 19% who said they don't believe in God, half of them said, but I do believe in some higher spiritual power that orders the world. That's weird. That means that basically half the atheists of America probably aren't atheists. Not in the strict sense, but there's this kind of spiritual dimension. Really fascinating to me is if we go to China, two very recent studies were conducted in China of children's belief in God or not. Now, the curious thing about this is that, as many of you know, belief in God is not encouraged in the school system in China. In fact, it's discouraged. But they found that before kids get to school, they already believe that someone, not something, someone made and moves the world. Religion is universal. And of course, it was the same back in ancient Greece, in, say, Athens, where Jeff and Aaron have just returned from doing some filming. When Christianity arrived here in Athens, it faced a world full of religion. The Apostle Paul came here with his mission band in about the year 50, right in the middle of the first century, and tried to bring Christianity to this universal spiritual impulse. And in Acts chapter 17, we're told that Paul found religion everywhere in Athens. Listen to this. While Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see that the city was full of idols. These are little sort of material depictions of the gods. And many ancient Greeks, not all, were into idols. That's one religious option. So he reasoned in the synagogue with the Jews and God-fearing Greeks. That's another religious option. As well as in the marketplace day by day with those who happened to be there. And then he meets two other groups. A group of Epicurean and Stoic philosophers. The Epicureans do believe in God, but don't believe God is the least bit interested in the world. Stoics also believe in God and believe he is active in the world, and they disagreed with idol worship. And they began to dispute with him. Some of them asked, what is this babbler trying to say? Others remarked, he seems to be advocating foreign gods. They said this because Paul was preaching the good news about Jesus and the resurrection, a new religious option. Then they took him and brought him to the meeting of the Areopagus, the kind of high court of ideas, where they said to him, may we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? And then one of the things I love about this passage in Acts 17 is that the narrator of the passage, Luke, adds this almost humorous element about what he knows of Athens. He goes, and it's sort of almost in brackets. Well, it is in brackets, but you know what I mean. All the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there spent their time doing nothing but talking about and listening to the latest ideas. They were really into religion. So Paul stood up in the meeting of the Areopagus and said, people of Athens, I see that in every way you are very religious. For as I walked around and looked carefully at your objects of worship, I even found an altar with this inscription, to an unknown God. Now, let's just pause here. The Athenians were so into religion. They even had inscriptions to gods they didn't know about, just in case they'd missed someone. They wanted to cover all the bases. My point, of course, is that religion is everywhere. It always has been. It always will be. The percentage of people who are genuine atheists will always be really quite small. But here's the thing. Despite the universality of religion, many of us find ways to avoid the religious impulse. And I want to talk about two of the most compelling ways to avoid the implications of this universality. I'm talking about atheism and pluralism, two very different strategies. One is, of course, to deny the whole thing, and the other is to embrace the whole thing. But actually, they both can be ways of avoiding the implications. And what I want to do is talk about these, and then we're going to return to Paul and see what he says about why anyone would take Christianity specifically seriously, whether atheist, pluralist, or just distracted. So let me just talk for a moment about atheism. Our atheist friends, and maybe there are people here watching who would describe themselves as atheists, very often explain away the universality of religion by saying it just indicates that there's a kind of psychological crutch in religion. That the reason all cultures have some kind of religion is because of our psychology. We're trying to meet deep needs. It's not that religion is in any way intellectual, it just satisfies us psychologically. So two ways I've seen atheist friends go down this route. To say, on the one hand, that religion just developed as a way of avoiding the fear of death. People have always been terrified of death, so what do? You invent a spiritual realm when you die. Okay, sounds cool. Except that our very earliest evidence for religion sometimes offers no indication these religions were interested in the afterlife. So the evidence doesn't match this. I mean, even Judaism, all scholars will acknowledge, even Judaism in its first period, right up to about 1000 BC, sort of King David period, have almost no interest in the afterlife. It's in the later prophets that you begin to get a clear doctrine of the afterlife, but not in early Judaism, and the same with other religions. So then sometimes atheists say, okay, well, maybe not afterlife, maybe the psychological need that religion was invented to meet was the justification for morality. So societies needed you to obey certain morals, so we invent superheroes, gods, who will punish you if you don't obey. And so really, religion is a kind of psychological control mechanism to make you be more moral. Again, this is problematic based on the evidence because we have very clear evidence that some of the earliest religions had no interest in morality. None. Yeah, of course we think Judaism and Christianity and Islam have an interest in morality, but famously, Greek and Roman religion, very ancient stuff, had no interest in morals and ethics. That was considered a discussion for philosophy, not for religion. So the kind of psychological explanation offered by our atheist friends just doesn't work. And I genuinely think our atheist friends need to face the reality that there's a growing body of evidence to suggest that the religious impulse arises not from mere psychology, but from our rational propensity to explain the universe. Actually, the real cause of religion, if I can put it like this, is the fact that we keep on asking questions about why. Now, we are humans who ask why from when we're very young. Those of you who have children, you know this. You say you're going to do something, and what's the response? Why? And you think you give a pretty good explanation, but they're not satisfied. Why? So you give another layer of explanation, and that's not good enough. Why? The thing is, we think we grow out of that. we just become more sophisticated in our whys. And the more why questions you ask along the chain of explanation, the more likely you are to arise at the fundamental why questions, like this. Why is there something rather than nothing? That's a good one. How is nature so rationally ordered? Why can our minds detect this natural order? How do things live? Why do we live? It seems that this rational need for explanation, for investigation, gave rise to religion. Now, I'm not just making this up. There's an awful lot of research into this now that bears this out. In fact, there's this amazing study, a 3-year project with 57 researchers on it, conducting 40 separate studies across 20 countries. Right? That's massive. Arriving at the conclusion, the natural default position seems to be for children to think a non-human someone or someones are the best explanation for the apparent purpose and order in nature all around. And only later do we instruct children out of religion. The intuition is there from the beginning. In other words, the religious impulse really seems to be the result of human beings looking at the rational order of the universe and thinking the only genuine explanation is that there is a rational mind behind the rationality of the universe itself. Now, Paul in Athens acknowledges this. He acknowledges this universal, rational starting point for the religious impulse. Before he makes his specific case for Christianity, he admits that Greeks have stumbled across the basics by themselves. The God, he says in this speech in Athens, the God who made the world and everything in it, is the Lord of heaven and earth and does not live in temples built by hands. Now that's something Stoics will have agreed on. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, because he himself gives all men life and breath and everything else. Now listen to this. For in him we live and move and have our being. At this point, he's quoting a famous Greek theologian poet, Epimenides, 600 BC. And then he quotes another one. As some of your own poets have said, we are his offspring. That is God's offspring. That's Aratus, 250 BC. Pre-Christian Greek philosophers looking at the universe and thinking there must be a rational mind behind it. Now, please don't let me confuse you at this point. I don't think Paul, in fact, I'm certain Paul did not accept the stories of Greek religion or the idols of Greek religion. But he certainly did acknowledge the shared intellectual starting point of religion. The rationality of nature and the rationality of our minds can only be explained if there is a rational mind behind it all, in whom we live and move and have our being. If you're an atheist today, can I, as politely as I can, ask you to investigate this further? The psychological explanation of religion just doesn't work. I'd love to think you'll take a second look at the logic behind the universality of religion. It's not mere psychology. It's rationality. But let me turn to another way that's more popular to avoid religion. Not so much atheism, not so much the rejection of all religion, but pluralism, which is kind of the embracing of all religion. It's not the denying, it's the embracing. The pluralism that you might meet in the bar or the street or your grumpy uncle at Thanksgiving who's read 1 or 2 books more than you, that kind of pluralism basically says, all religions basically teach the same thing. Superficially, they differ. You know, one of them meets in a funny building and others meet in a different funny building. But basically, they teach the same thing at the core. Now, Again, I don't mean to be impolite, but actually when you investigate the religions, when you get closer to the religions, it's pretty clear that the opposite is the case. That they are superficially similar and substantially very different. I'll just give you 3 examples that will recall some of the stuff we've looked at over the previous weeks. For example, what happens in the afterlife? Pretty good question, pretty fundamental. You'd think they could agree on that. But Hinduism teaches that you have a soul, your Atman, remember week 1? And that you'll be reincarnated into another body until you can escape and merge with Brahman, and then you don't have to come back. Now, the thing is, the Buddha knew all about Hinduism and totally rejected this. He said, you don't have a soul, and there's no Brahman worth worrying about. He rejected reincarnation, actually. He said there's no soul that goes into another body. He taught a doctrine that's quite complicated, but just called rebirth, which just means that the energy and physicality of this life bumps along, not into you as a new person, but into a new existence. But either way, it's not the same thing. Judaism, of course, teaches that you have one life, not multiple reincarnations. You die, and then at least Orthodox Judaism teaches that you'll be raised to be judged by God. Now, you don't need a degree in philosophy to work out these are not the same thing. Not one of these can be true while any one of the others is true. They cancel each other out. Now, okay, let's go to a more basic question like how many gods are there? You'd think we could, agree on this. So Hinduism teaches there are many gods, and if you have Hindu friends, they will have chosen 1 or 2 or 3 favored gods that they worship in their life. But Muhammad, the founder of Islam, said there aren't many gods and you don't get to pick. There's one God. Tawhid, remember from last week? The central doctrine of Islam. There's one God. Oneness is the ultimate truth. And the Buddha, well, we can't fully work out what the Buddha thought about God, but he basically did say there's no God worth worrying about. Now, you don't need a degree in mathematics to work out these aren't the same thing. Yeah, I mean, if there are many gods, there can't just be one. And if there's just one God, there can't be many. And if there's no God, there can neither be many nor one. Okay, what about Islam and Christianity? They kind of agree on the numerical value of God, at least. I mean, there's one God for both Muslims and Christians. And so, yes, they agree on that fundamental numerical value of God. Excellent. But if you ask Muslims and Christians, how do you know God? How do you get to know God? How do you get right with God? Their answers are not just shades of difference, they're contradictions. Christianity teaches, as I know 99% of you know, Christianity teaches that God looked on us in all of our fallenness and frailty and sin and entered into the world himself in Jesus Christ. Himself, God in the flesh, and then lived the perfect life you couldn't live, gave that life on a cross, bore our penalty into himself, and then rose again to offer us free forgiveness. Okay, that's Christianity. Every one of those thoughts that I just explained is critiqued by Islam, as we saw last week. Islam says it's blasphemous to say Jesus is God. Section 4 of the Quran says Jesus didn't even die on a cross. The Quran says no one can atone for your sins. It says you have to atone for your own sins. These are all not just shades of difference, these are fundamentally contradictory visions of very basic material. Pluralism does not work. But why do I say pluralism is, or at least can be, a way of avoiding religion? Because on the face of it, it looks incredibly polite. To say that they're all true is lovely. It's just that it can actually be lazy. A way of not having to think about the truth of any one of them. I just say, they're all true in their own special way. Maybe Jesus both did die on a cross and didn't die on a cross. If I can put it like this. Imagine you want to know how to say I love you in Chinese, in Mandarin. And one Chinese friend says, it's easy. You just say, 我爱你. And you go, excellent. Then another Chinese friend goes, it's 我恨你. And you go, oh no, okay, here's a problem. What do? 我爱你,我恨你. One option is to investigate it for yourself. Might take you 30 minutes. You might have to, Google. Or go to a library and get a Mandarin English dictionary and, turn all the way to the phrase I love you and work out. But there's a much easier way, much more economy of effort. And that is to say, they're both true in their own special way. 我爱你 and 我恨你. Maybe they're just dialect variations. There's only one syllable difference. How different could it be? And you sit back, don't bother investigating, and happily say they're both true. Of course, the problem is, 我爱你 means I love you in Chinese. And 我恨你 means I hate you. I hate you. 我爱你. But you can see my point, right? You could investigate the truth of the religions, and it might take a little bit of thinking, a little bit of investigation, drilling down, testing. Or you can go the pluralist route and say they're all true in their own special way. Well, I fear for our culture that it avoids the universality of religion either by atheism or pluralism. But I'm well aware of the question people are going to want to ask me, having outlined all of that stuff. The obvious question is, why Christianity? Okay, maybe there's something to this universal hunch. It's not just psychology, it's rationality. Okay, maybe all religions can't be true, but why your one? I think it's a fair question. And so I think it's only fair that I try and conclude this whole series by explaining why I am confident in the singular truth and beauty of just one item in the art gallery of the world religions. Let me first talk a little about the truth, and then I'll talk about the beauty, and then I'm done. The question of truth brings us straight back to our passage in Acts 17, because Paul says that the unknown creator that everyone's sort of worked out is there has touched history in a verifiable way. In the past, Paul says, God overlooked such ignorance. He means the idol worship, the fashioning little pictures of gods. But now he commands all people everywhere, whoa, that's pretty universal, to repent. That is, change heart back to God. For he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. Okay. He has given proof of this to all men by raising him from the dead. Let's just absorb this for a second. Paul is saying that the God of universal hunch has become an actor in verifiable history. He has given a proof to all people. Now, the really important thing to spot here is that this proof didn't happen in someone's dream or merely in a holy book or in a speculation. No, it happened in history. And this is radically different from the kinds of claims you'll find in the other religions. Let's just quickly walk through them. In Islam, we are asked to believe that the revelation of God came to Muhammad via the angel Gabriel when no one else was there but Muhammad. He received the revelation and taught others, but there's no way of testing it. You can believe it, as many people do, but you can't test it before believing it. In Hinduism, the Vedas and the Upanishads, these founding texts of Hinduism, come from like the dawn of time. We don't really know who they were written by, how they were written. We don't really know exactly when they were written. They are just there as sacred texts making all sorts of claims about your soul and Brahman and reincarnation and all the rest. You can believe it, as millions of people do, but you can't test it before believing it. And the same is basically true with Buddhism. The Buddha had his revelation one night in May while meditating under a Bodhi tree, where he saw all the truths of the universe, so the text tells us, in that moment when he was enlightened. And then he taught the world. Now again, you can believe it, as millions do, but you can't test it. There's nothing there to actually verify with other witnesses and so on. Here's the thing, Christianity claims something radically different. At the heart of the Christian faith is not a lone spiritual insight or a philosophical speculation or a dream someone had or even a divine dictation in a holy book that you can't question. No. At the heart of the Christian faith is a series of events in datable time with a multiplicity of witnesses within and without the New Testament, which means that you can investigate the truthfulness of the Jesus story even before you believe it. That is a radically different kind of truth claim. Now, I'm not saying that everything in Christianity can be verified in this way, but I am saying the very core beliefs can. We have exactly the kind of historical evidence you would expect if Jesus really did teach, heal, die, and rise again. It is verifiable. Now, this point of difference gave great pause to one of the most important atheists of the last generation. I'm talking about this man, Anthony Flew, who's professor of philosophy at the University of Reading in the UK, massively important scholar in philosophical circles. Maybe you've never heard of him, but he wrote textbooks on atheism that are still textbooks in universities today. He's a major player. But then he ruined the whole thing in 2007 by publishing this book, There Is, and no is scratched out, a God. How the world's most notorious atheist changed his mind. In which he basically said, oops. He said the new discoveries into the intense mathematics and information in DNA and new discoveries in the fine-tuning of the laws of physics to produce life had convinced him there must be a rational mind, God, behind the universe. Here are his own very nerdy philosophical words. There exists a self-existent, immutable, immaterial, omnipotent, and omniscient being. Put that in an English accent and I think it would just sound extraordinary. Bring it up at a dinner party. God. But actually, that's not the most interesting thing about this book. At the end of the book, there's an appendix where he asked a leading British historian called N.T. Wright to outline in about, 3,000 or 4,000 words the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And you might go, what is the world's most famous atheist doing having a chapter on the resurrection of Jesus? Now, Anthony Flew doesn't say he believes it, but he wanted to include it because he said, if there's any revelation from this omnipotent being throughout world history, it's got to be this one. In fact, in his own words, if you're wanting omnipotence to set up a religion, it seems to me that this is the one to beat. Yeah, the resurrection of Jesus looks like an X marks the spot for the disclosure of God to the world. God has given proof of this, Paul said to the Athenians, by raising Jesus from the dead. That's the question of truth. What about the beauty? What do we see when we look at Christianity that is beautiful that you don't see anywhere else? in the art gallery of ideas. And if you've been following this series, you know exactly what I'm about to say, I'm pretty sure. Every other religion except Christianity says you have to earn your way to salvation. And Christianity alone says you can't, but God loves you, came into the world, lived the life you could never live, gave that life up on a cross as a perfect sacrifice for sins, then rose again to offer you free forgiveness. This is the Christian doctrine of grace, and it is at the very heart of the Christian faith. But of course, you know that the religions don't teach this. We've seen this over the previous weeks. Hinduism teaches that there are three paths to salvation: the path of knowledge, the path of deeds, and the path of devotion. And all three require maximum effort on your part. The same is true of Buddhism. He said the only way to attain nirvana is through the eightfold path. You know, right speech, right livelihood, right mindfulness, right concentration, and so on. And Islam teaches that you must follow the 5 pillars in order to have any hope of salvation. You've got to make your correct confession of faith. You've got to give the 2.5% tax to the mosque. You've got to pray your 5 daily prayers. You've got to fast during the month of Ramadan every year, the month that just finished last week. And you've got to visit Mecca once in your life, if you're able. And only then can you be forgiven. Friends, Christianity teaches the reverse. It says that there's nothing you can do. You can't save yourself. But through Christ, you can be completely forgiven freely. The Apostle Paul puts it beautifully in an earlier speech in the book of Acts. The one whom God raised from the dead did not see decay. Therefore, my friends, I want you to know that through Jesus, the forgiveness of sins is proclaimed to you. Through him, everyone who believes is set free from every sin, a justification you were not able to obtain under the law of Moses. As I said last week, this is sometimes a reason people reject Christianity, because it seems too lazy, too easy. But actually, it's a reason many others embrace Christianity. They see this beauty and are drawn to it. Now, I can't show you my friend's face. I can't even tell you her name for various security reasons. I'll call her Aisha. She was raised a devout Muslim. In fact, she saw it as her duty to argue against the dumb Christians. And she had what she thought were really good arguments against Christianity. Christianity is blasphemous for saying that God became a human being. The history of Jesus is flimsy. The Gospels are basically made up. And she thought grace made no sense. Grace to her was not just lazy, it was superfluous, because she genuinely believed what the Quran teaches, that you have the power in yourself to obey and be saved. But here's the thing. She had university friends who were Christians who gave her some history books and said, okay, we can't answer all your questions, but read these. She read them. She was disturbed to discover the Gospels might not be flimsy, that they really look like genuine history with a wide verification. And so she started to read the Gospels. And as she got to the 4th Gospel, chapter 13 of John's Gospel, she came across the bit where Jesus is on his knees washing the disciples' feet like a household slave. Yeah, you know the bit? And she'd been trained to think of that as blasphemous, the idea that God would wash disciples' feet. But then a thought entered her head that she couldn't remove. The thought was, who would make this up? God serving us. Maybe this is not made up.
Well, when you look at Muhammad, you are surrounded by this amazing personality who's a great leader, who's a great arbitrator, who's the founder of a great religion, and he is untouchable. You look at Allah, who is just unreachable. Then you look at Jesus, who's washing his disciples' feet. And he doesn't care about his glory or the fact that he is the Son of God or he's the Messiah. Even if we call him a Messiah, it's unthinkable to think that a Messiah would be washing his disciples' feet. That sense of humbling is beautiful.
So then she finally decided to disprove Christianity's doctrine of grace. And the way she decided to do it was to prove to herself that she could be moral, just as the Quran says, that she has the power within her to attain a righteousness that would be pleasing to God. It didn't go so well.
In my mind, Islam and Sharia was an idealistic way to live, which could lead you to heaven on earth, and that's what we're attempting. So it took a long period of time for me to realize that laws do not change the core of what a person is. And that was one of the biggest changes in my thinking.
So what was it that tipped you over the edge to say, oh my goodness, I'm a Christian?
I tried really hard to be good. For around a month when I was still wrestling and everything was
You managed a month being really good, did you?
I tried. I'm very stubborn. And I tried, okay, tomorrow I'm not going to be annoyed by this colleague of mine, or I'm going to be more patient. And I came home and I said, I can't do it. And it took a lot of convincing for me to realize that I'm not as good as I think I am. And I then took communion at this church. And I remember, because I was crying in the pews and I was trying to hide my face, but I was utterly broken at that point. So.
And that was a kind of moment where you said, you can't save yourself, but here is the gift.
Yeah.
That's yours.
And how often do you get a God trying to make amends for what you've done?
Soak that up, friends. How often do you get a God who tries to make amends for what you have done? Aisha now follows Jesus Christ. She's raising her little family in Jesus Christ. And I contacted her during the week just to make sure she was happy for me to play this. And she said, absolutely. If it helps just one person see what God can do, it's worth it. So I want to end this series by saying, whether you are an atheist or pluralist or just distracted, come to Christ. Come to Christ. This Lord who has made amends through his death and resurrection. If Aisha were here today, she would join me in saying, whether religious or irreligious, whether pluralist, atheist, come to Christ and you will find what is true and beautiful. Lord, will you in your mercy grant us eyes to see, ears to hear, minds to follow. How I pray, Lord, that amidst all the millions of things that I've said today, that ultimately your grace would be left with all those hearing. That we might all depend on what Jesus Christ has done for us, that we might have grace. In Jesus' name.